We all feel it as marketers oftentimes when we're looking at our news feeds and we're seeing things that are really disturbing to us. And we're being asked to create a campaign with impact. And so we're seeing things that could use our impact.
The only thing stronger than the hate that's out there right now is love, right? The only thing that will heal us, that will bring us together is love. And to me, that was really powerful, not just as a human being, as a community member, but to me, it was like such a direct link to brands, because the truth is as a brand, what do you stand for if you don't have your consumers' love and respect, right? Without brand love, what is there?
Stepping into the leadership of a global powerhouse is never quiet, but doing so in the midst of a massive industry transformation is a true trial by fire. For Nancy Reyes and Chris Beresford Hill, taking the reins at BBDO Americas has been about more than just maintaining a legacy. It's about architecting a future where tech and authenticity can coexist. Today, we explore how Nancy and Chris stay grounded, how they're tackling client fragmentation, and what they're looking for in the next generation of talent. I'm Luz Corona, and this is Campaign Chemistry. Hello and good morning, Marina and Mike. Welcome to the show. How are you both today?
Doing all right. Doing all right.
Morning.
Caffeined up. I usually take my caffeine with a little bit of side of Bad Bunny. That really gets me up in the morning. I don't know about you guys. That will wake me up.
It helps. It definitely helps.
Week.
Yep, this week it's on repeat, and and partly why we brought you both on, to talk about the role of Puerto Rico on mainstream culture in the U.S. But before we get to all the gems that we just discussed before we started recording, let's give our listeners an intro on who we're talking to today. So, Marina Filippelli, you've been with Orci for over 12 years, CEO for nearly 6 years. Tell us a little bit about your day-to-day and your role right now and kind of what you're facing as a leader.
Yeah, so Orci is celebrating a big anniversary this year, 40 years of independence, Hispanic first multicultural agency. It's kind of amazing to think about the agency's longevity in the ebbs and flows of this incredible market that we work in. So right now I am thinking a lot about, the legacy of a Hispanic first agency in the situation we find ourselves in today. Not just politically, but also in terms of industry and how things are changing for marketers. And there's a lot there, right, that we can unpack. But I think, big picture, it's, what is being multicultural? What does being Hispanic really mean to marketers today? How are they addressing it? What kind of partners do they need to work with to get the most out of what they do every day with their brands? And really, keeping an eye on the next generation and, what does everything we're going through now mean for them? What does it mean in terms of how they think about their careers? Do they want to go into marketing and advertising? Do they think about independent agencies as a way to build their careers? Do they think about multicultural as a way to build their careers? So that's kind of what's going on in my head before 7 a.m. And then, and then we just go from there.
Great. Oh, that's not a lot, really. I think you're a little busy, but
just the little things. I tackle the big things first, and then the rest of the day is Bad Bunny on repeat, as we said.
Yeah. So. There we go. Well, I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit about what those client conversations look like and all that. So we'll get into that later on in the episode. My friend Mike over here, I've known you for a minute.
Yes.
We have, a history. You've written some incredible opinion pieces, thought leadership pieces for me in the past across different publications. But in terms of your professional experience, you come from ad agency side and you're currently leading a consultancy for nonprofits. Tell us about that a little bit and what your day-to-day looks like.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, just to give a little background, so I came up through Dentsu Aegis and UM, and I think I realized this recently that we held the same position at UM, but at
I
different
just,
times, like a year apart.
yes, I
Like a
just
year
saw
apart.
that.
Yeah, we both were Coke. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was like UM Studios content manager. I'm like, oh wait, we had the same job.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we
We
can
can
have those
trade
conversations later. Yeah.
exactly.
But yeah, came up through that agency, then into media at Meredith, where I led branded content, and most recently working with nonprofits, really trying to bring a level of growth and foundation to a lot of nonprofits. What we've seen a lot of times is many nonprofits that, regardless of their age, I've seen some from 5 years to 15-year-old organizations. They don't necessarily have the foundation of marketing and communications because so much of it is left to the back burner. There are people who come in with a passion and that's what they focus on. But oftentimes the story that they're telling to the public and to their donors just kind of gets lost. And so what I do is I come in and I sort of help them develop those basic foundations. And think about anything as simple as literally everyone using the same logo. So now that sounds like the most simplest thing in the world, but for many nonprofits, and which are brands, right? Like, to be honest, they are brands. You will see people using logos from like their founding to like, you know, this brand new, we just got it rebranded and everybody's all over the place. No one knows where the files are. And things just as simple as that, getting that in place and really sort of auditing and figuring that out can make a hell of a lot of difference and help them grow. So that's what I'm focused on, is really helping them grow and have impact.
That's amazing. I feel like you both are doing the Lord's work. You're just such leaders with purpose, you know, Marina, like with your, you know, educating your clients. And then Mike, I know this, you're a passionate guy and I know this is like close to your heart. So, and I think you've identified this white space, you know, it's so true. Nonprofits are just focused on so many other parts of the business. So, thank you for doing what you do. Really cool stuff. I'm excited to talk to you both today because I feel like with your backgrounds, everything that you just talked about, what your day to day looks like, you are, you know, you have such great POVs on what's going on right now. So obviously, I don't need to tell you guys, but to brief our listeners, you know, we are heading into Super Bowl. Bad Bunny is the halftime show performer. This has been an exciting moment, you know, only increase after this past weekend, after he did so great at the Grammys. Very pivotal moment for the Latino community, right? His album is the first Spanish language album to win Album of the Year at the Grammys. So obviously a lot of momentum here, especially considering the socio-political state, right? But before we get into kind of that, I'd love to hear from you both as Latinos and as marketers. Why is this such a big moment for the Latino community and just the country in general? Marina, let's start with you.
Oh man, there's so much. I mean, it was interesting. I think yesterday morning, the first thing I did was try to put into a LinkedIn post my feelings on the topic. And as the day went on, every person I know, every colleague I interact with, right, everybody had such a different take on it, which was great to see. I mean, I think my LinkedIn feed was just filled with commentary about, you know, the Grammys and Bad Bunny specifically. And that was just, I mean, that in and of itself is just such a moment, right? We're all rallying around that. For me personally, the way I approached it and what really resonated with me was, you know, his commentary, you know, more so beyond the ice out comment, right? But the fact that he really took the time to say, you know, the only thing stronger than the hate that's out there right now is love, right? The only thing that will heal us, that will bring us together is love. And to me, that was really powerful, not just as a human being, as a community member, but to me, it was like such a direct link to brands, because the truth is as a brand, what do you stand for if you don't have your consumers love and respect, right? Without brand love, what is there? I mean, yes, you can get the eyeballs. Anyone can buy reach these days, right? Anyone with the right media dollars, you can buy the reach. But can you buy brand love? Can you buy a true passion and loyalty for your brand? That's much harder, right? That's created through actions and how you really take the time to understand your consumers and what they want, what they're looking for in that connection. So to me, it was a very direct parallel to what we do, right? To say that right now as brands, everyone needs to be taking a moment to think about what they stand for as a company, and also to look at what their consumers are looking for, right? To really think about what do we stand for? And I don't mean necessarily taking a political stand. I mean understanding that your consumers are struggling. They're going through different things. They're feeling certain ways. And for you as a brand to try to pretend like that's not going to impact you is, I think, a little foolish. Honestly, you really have to think about that, because it's not just the moment today. It's the future. What are you building? What kind of loyalty are you building? Especially with your young consumers who are, coming up in their lives, watching this all unfold on their social media feeds. So to me, that was really powerful and a true, thorough line to what we do every day in terms of helping brands really make those connections.
It's so true. And it's just interesting to hear how that speech, affected all of us as, as Latinos and as leaders, because very inspiring to hear that's how you heard it, Marina. I heard it in a similar fashion too. It's so easy to get caught up in the day to day and these narratives that we're hearing and what we're seeing on the news, and just kind of it's easier to lean towards anger and all that. But hearing it from this trusted voice, kind of who we've put on a pedestal, because of what he represents, the success that he's driven in this country, being a Spanish language artist, I definitely stopped and I listened and, made note of it and said, okay, maybe it's time to just kind of calm down and listen, and we can't continue hate with hate. Mike, I'd love to hear how you kind of interpreted the speech too. And especially, you're Puerto Rican, and you were talking about how you were in Puerto Rico and you heard Bad Bunny on every corner, so tell us.
Yeah, that was like a few years ago too. It was funny. I remember that conversation. It was like 4 years ago or something like that.
Yeah,
it was happening. He was before the residency. He did a 3-day residency in San Juan prior to that, and that was the talk of the town. Like everybody in San Juan was talking about it. It was free, but you had to wait in line for it. It was crazy. And then he just came back and did the 2-month residency, which, it's interesting. So Bad Bunny in himself, he's an interesting character, just period, right? I think he represents all of the sort of contradictions in Puerto Rican identity that we see here, and beyond the ni de aquí ni de allá sort of idea. Like Puerto Ricans are that, even on the island, they're not quite American. They're not quite estadounidense, right?
Yeah.
We're all American, right? But we're not necessarily, we're sort of estadounidense, right? In English and Spanish, you have different terms, right? Like in Spanish, you can actually differentiate the two. In English, they sort of co-opt the word. But so you have that sort of, here or there, Latin America, United States, so he sort of embodies that. And even in his speech there, when he said, we all are Americans, he didn't say we all are American citizens. He didn't say we're all U.S. citizens, right? He said we're all American. So which is a much wider sort of breadth, which speaks not just to people here in the States, but across the 2 continents, right? So I think for that, I thought that was great. And I thought that he chose his words very carefully as he was speaking, especially English being a second language. He was really thinking about the words. And what I also thought was interesting, my daughter pointed this out really quick, was that he paraphrased a quote from Martin Luther King, basically saying that love is the only thing stronger than hate. So we can't fight hate. There's in his last book, Martin Luther King talked about this, right? He talked about you can't fight fire with fire, because that's the most ridiculous thing ever. Right. You have to fight it with something else. You have to fight hate with love. And I thought that was great that he pointed that out. So he shows that he's very conscious of what's going on, and he's very conscious of what he's saying at different times. And for me, as a Puerto Rican, I see that, and I see the sort of gymnastics he's going through. Not only as a Latino, but also as a Puerto Rican, going back and forth, right? Someone who has been very vocal about independence for Puerto Rico, but is also very aware that there are many conservative Puerto Ricans that love him as well.
Right.
So you really sort of get that, and I can see it in sort of that what became the meme, right? The meme that's going on right now with him. Like, so much is going on.
Yep. In
his head, and for all of us, it's the same thing, right? So much is happening right now. As Puerto Ricans, we have what some might consider a relative privilege of being U.S. citizens and of carrying a U.S. passport. However, in many times, if you have an accent, that doesn't matter. And so you have that, again, the juggling of just kind of privilege versus not privilege, and really all those things in one moment. And I thought that you can see it just building up in him, and, really trying to control that. So it'll be really interesting next week on Sunday, how that comes to fruition. But for me, I'm excited for the Super Bowl, and I'm seeing, for him as an individual, I'm excited. For him as a Puerto Rican, I'm super excited. For him as a Latino, it's great. It's great to see.
Yeah, I love that, Mike. Marina, I see you nodding. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I was just going to add that I just saw a study done by Think Now on the Super Bowl, and what the impact of Bad Bunny performing is meaning for people. And basically, it showed that around 45% of Hispanics were much more excited to watch the Super Bowl because of Bad Bunny. I mean, I think now that number with the Grammy wins, I should say, probably increased even more. I mean, I think, the reality is yes, there's been a lot of controversy around it, but the truth is that there's so much more positive than negative. And I think the NFL really was so thoughtful, going back to what I was saying about really brands understanding what these moments mean and how you show up for your consumers. They're betting on Hispanic consumers, right? They're saying we're okay with some level of discomfort, frustration, anger, because the truth is that we're actually building something bigger globally and with the biggest growing population in this country, right? So it's just, I think, to Mike's point, it's like we're watching all this kind of history unfold and really seeing how it's not going to culminate on next Sunday, but it's certainly going to be a really huge moment.
Yeah, I completely and wholeheartedly agree. I think it is a big moment for Latinos, for all the reasons that we just said. Marina, you just referenced that study. Is that the Bad Bunny survey from Think Now that followed
yes.
Okay. I want to talk about that, but I want to kind of preface it with this immigration raids impact study put together by Think Now and Community Projects, which is a group of advertising leaders working to safeguard the U.S. Hispanic community. And now this took note of just consumer sentiment, the Hispanic consumer sentiment with all these ICE raids going on. Can you give us a few key takeaways? I know you have kind of like the brand perspective here. Can you give us a few key takeaways from that study?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just preface it by saying that, we kind of started the group and by the way, there's no real group. It's more of a loosely connected group of professionals that are just like, last year we were like, we need to do something. We need to feel like we're participating a little bit more in this conversation. And there's honestly a lot of fear in the community, both as community members, but also as business leaders, that if you say the wrong thing, if you're too vocal, there's going to be backlash. And so we really thought about how can we help with getting people to understand what's really happening. And this started early last year, really. And then also, what are positive actions we can take, and that's why I think the Bad Bunny thing resonated with me so much, because that's really at the crux of what we've been trying to do, right? We're trying to fight hate with love and understanding, right? Getting people to see what's really happening. So the founders of Think Now, which is an independent research company, they were very passionate about helping in some way. And their way obviously is through research. And so they conducted this study pro bono. They just really wanted to get the information into people's hands. And, it was very interesting. They'd surveyed not just Hispanics, they surveyed a cross section of the US population, and we were able to break it down by lots of different ways, including age groups. And I think what's the most interesting takeaway, as we've shared the study in different groups, and we've had a couple of webinars, we're having another one this week. People are really confused about what's happening in the sense of, what do people really think about it? What you see on the news or what you see on social media is always the extremes, right? And the truth is a lot more complicated than that. It's a lot more in the gray zone. I think there's a growing increase of people who are against the way that ICE raids are being carried out. But there's not necessarily a predominance of consumers that are saying brands should get involved. So there's a lot of sort of muddled, thoughts, which makes sense in the sense that we're all in the same boat, right? Like I think all of us are trying to figure out what is the right way forward in these moments. And the only thing that I think really becomes very clear in a lot of these studies is a couple of things. One is younger populations are definitely taking notice, and they are way more upset, I think, and demanding of brands and in general of politicians to do something. Whereas, older generations are still a lot more like, well, let's wait and see. We're not really sure. Right. And keep in mind, both of the waves of this study were done before all the things that have been happening in Minnesota. So they were really focused around, just from a timing perspective, of all the activity in Los Angeles and Chicago, right, and some of the smaller markets. So one is the younger population. That just was a huge, call out overall. Really, if you're as a brand thinking about your younger populations as an audience, you really need to pay attention to what's happening. The other thing is shopping habits and the perception of what this means for Hispanics and anyone who feels like people they know are being adversely impacted by what's happening. So what does this mean? Shopping habits definitely changed. A lot less, in-store shopping, economic reductions in different areas, right? Some shifting maybe online, but some just completely held back, especially when you're talking about Spanish dominant or older populations of Hispanics. But it also trickles down into their friends and families, right? So there's definitely, I think, right now a perception of, okay, is this going to shift indefinitely? It's kind of, if you think about like COVID, right? Mm-hmm. Was this just a moment in time and shopping patterns go back to the way before, or does it have a true significant, long-lasting impact in the way that people, shop and spend money? And the other thing that really came out of it is the overall sentiment of patriotism, which has gone pretty much off a cliff with almost every audience, and especially Hispanics, as you can imagine. So anybody who's done consumer research in the U.S. Hispanic market can tell you that typically Hispanics are the ones who will say, I'm the most optimistic about my life being better than my parents' life was in this country. They're the most optimistic about the American dream and what it means. And since 2024, which was the last time that Think Now did that type of question, it's basically fallen off a cliff with U.S. Hispanics. They're just really not feeling that patriotism right now. So again, it's about, will this rebound, or are we now dealing with a decade or a few years of bad consumer sentiment because of what's happened? And one more thing I'll add is, if you think about 90% plus of the current population of Hispanics in this country is either U.S. citizen, U.S. born, or legal resident. So that means that even if these deportations, which by the way, most of what's happening is not even really deporting people. It's actually a much lower number than in other administrations. But even if they continue to deport people, it will not significantly change the demographic makeup of this country. So the reality is that all of these implications are going to stay with us because these folks are not all leaving. They're staying here. Like, again, they're U.S. citizens, they're residents, et cetera. So it is something very important that I think all brands and marketers need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, Marina, you bring up so many interesting points there. I mean, I think there is kind of a misconception that this administration is essentially, quote unquote, cleaning out the country, right? But you're saying like this research shows these are actually the American citizens, who are contributing to the big $4 trillion, spending power that Hispanics have in the U.S. They're going to be around. They're going to remember this. So very interesting to hear kind of these shopping patterns. I'm curious now that you're pointing these out, how it'll continue to unfold considering the change in shopping patterns and the different impact on generations, because as we know, a majority of Hispanic households are multi-generational. So, how does that affect what's being brought into the home, what's being bought, what brands they're loyal to and everything, the differences in generations. But what I'm also interested in playing out, in the short term is that erosion of national pride and, losing faith in the American dream, especially as we're coming up. We are now in the 250th year of America, right? We're seeing it in some of these Super Bowl spots. We're seeing it, it's going to be a theme that we see playing out. But I'm curious to see how the brands are going to show up around this big kind of moment for the country, 250 years. What side of history are you going to be on? So I don't have the answers. That's just kind of a long rant, but I think there's so many key points that you just brought up that I'm very curious to see how it'll unfold over the next couple of years.
That's actually something we talk about during the study is what does happen in this year because of the anniversary. I think probably in Super Bowl spots, to your point, we're not going to see it as much because, not all the brands are thinking about it, but I think it'll be interesting to see in the summer when it's actually the anniversary, right? In July, like how are brands going to tackle this, especially brands that are targeting multicultural consumers, right? How do you thread that needle and say, we still believe, right? We still believe in the powerful vision of this country, and not pretend like nothing's happening. Now, a lot of things can happen between now and then. But, the other thing too is there's a lot of talks of boycotts going on. I'm sure you've all heard about it. I don't know if you guys have seen the resist and unsubscribe movement from Scott Galloway of, Pivot Podcast and Prof G. He's a marketing professor by trade. And one of the interesting things about, his perspective, and this is a guy who makes a lot of money and is a brand consultant and has been on many boards of corporations. And he's basically saying, you vote with your money right now. This is the only way forward. And he's actually taken the time to call out, and he's done mostly tech companies, right? He's really focused on what are the things you can unsubscribe from, because, and smartly, I think he's saying, I'm not going to tell you not to buy groceries, right? I'm not going to tell you to not get the staples, but if you have 5 streaming services, do you really need 5 streaming services? And we're going to see how that plays out over the course of this month. But I think that could have a change in, again, shopping patterns, consumer patterns. And Luz, to your point, when you're in a multiple generational household, how does someone who maybe is like in their 20s or in their 30s and is listening to these podcasts and is saying like, oh, should I be subscribing to Uber or, Disney Plus or whatever, and how that impacts the other generations that are in the household and how they think about spending money and what that means. So definitely so much to pay attention to right now on that front between now and the actual anniversary of the country in July.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun time looking at all this. I'll tell you that much.
I mean, speaking of boycott movements, I think one brand that really has, it is a very interesting situation is Target, right? Yeah. Minneapolis being the epicenter of activity right now. I think, they've come under fire for allowing agents to come into the stores where there are lots of Hispanic employees. But also one of their former employees just won Album of the Year. Bad Bunny, former Target employee,
Right.
has probably more visibility than anyone in the world. And now they have a new CEO. So it's sort of like, how do you sort of handle this sort of situation in terms of Target? They had this situation. They've gone through a few different rounds now, right? With a few years ago during the pandemic, after the killing of George Floyd, they've sort of been trying to balance sort of who they are versus, as a corporation versus what their values are. And of course, being at Minneapolis, it's been tough. So it's going to be interesting to see sort of where they go. But I do find it interesting that, former Target employee.
Yep. And with all that going on.
Ocasio-Martinez has just won and is very, very vocal about it. So, I guess we will see. Like, I think brands, I don't want to predict, but I assume a lot of brands might take a similar sort of stance as they do when like the Olympics come around in terms of patriotism come this summer, where it is, yes, we're proud to be Americans, but it's not necessarily, they want to stop short from endorsing. I see that as probably where they'll try to find that middle ground. Very similar, very like proud, like cheer on America.
Yep.
But not necessarily trying to stay away from specifically endorsing. There will be companies that do. They just go all in.
Yep. Yep.
There will be some that just go all in. I don't see any going sort of counter.
Yeah.
From that perspective, but either they will, very much like it's the Olympics or like, that type of patriotism that you see, or some others will really go in, not quite like Heritage Foundation ad, but
Yeah. I mean, you're so right, Mike, because there's a lot of things going on this year, right? Like the Super Bowl is just really like the tip off. It's just World Cup. We're going to, obviously it's a growing sport in the US, but this does have a very huge Hispanic fan base, and what is that going to look like? How are brands going to show up for their consumers in that point? And, I'd love to hear what you guys think. We talk about this on the campaign team. Like we feel for CMOs right now because, there's kind of like these business decisions being made and just kind of these stances, and just this almost this loyalty from some of the CEOs to this administration. But then the CMOs, the marketing teams are in charge of the image here. And they also are under pressure to deliver on their marketing budgets. But what do you do when you have this beautiful campaign that speaks to the consumer and then you have the key stakeholders in the background saying, no, we don't really, we're making business decisions that don't support these consumers. So there's a lot at play here. Mike, what are your thoughts there?
I think it's right. It's a very strange situation to be in. I think it was similar even during the pandemic and the first administration, where many of the marketers, people on the marketing side, wanted to do something. They wanted to stand for something. They felt that they wanted the values of the corporation to be true and to stay true out there. But you also have a board of directors and you have a CEO who answers to that board. And oftentimes that board and the marketers don't necessarily share the same values, right? Yeah. The job of the CEO is, to answer to the board. Their job is to the shareholders, and whatever their job is to really make sure like they do whatever makes the market move for their stock, right? So that can make the decisions seem very detached from the people who are in charge of the mission and really stating the mission to the public. So where you have, oftentimes advertisers and the marketing arm of, say, like a Procter & Gamble are doing a lot in the community, right? They work with lots of nonprofits. They work there. Meanwhile, the board and others have other priorities. And some of them are at the White House meeting with the administration. And some of them are really sort of like trying to curry favor in that case. So you have very different sort of situation. I wasn't trying to call out Procter & Gamble. I was just using that example. So
yes.
just
Disclaimer.
It was simply for simply as an example. I don't know their board, and I don't know where they lean. But as an example, like you can see something like how those things can really differ. And I think we all feel it as marketers oftentimes when we're looking at our news feeds and we're seeing things that are really disturbing to us, and we're being asked to create a campaign with impact. And so we're seeing things that could use our impact, but even if we try, like there's going to be, unfortunately, sometimes our brands could be great if it wasn't for corporations.
That is some philosophical statement right there. You're so right.
Brands could save the world, and they'd be saving it from the corporations. And unfortunately, the two aren't divorced, right?
If they didn't have to make money.
Yeah. Right. If they didn't have to make money, brands could solve all our problems, right?
Yeah.
Advertisers, marketers, they can come up with some great solutions to problems, and really unfortunately, a lot of the problems are caused by some of the corporations that are behind the brands.
Yep. The call is coming from inside the house.
Exactly. And it's tough, and it becomes like a really, I think for a lot of us, I think, like I said, I go back to the first administration and the pandemic, and even just the past few years and into this administration, in terms of mental health and really trying to wrap our heads around what's happening out there versus what we can do versus what we want to do versus what we're being told to do. It becomes, a very difficult situation to be in at times. I think that if we take Benito's words, and come at it with love, there's a lot of stuff we see that we hate, but coming at it with love, then I think that we can potentially make it through to the other side where potentially we can have that impact that we want. But it's a difficult position to be in right now for most marketers who really want to make change and really create impact in the world.
Yeah, for sure. To that point, Marina, everything that Mike just said about what marketers are facing, can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing on your end from your client conversations and how you're guiding marketers through the dilemma that Mike just described? And also just addressing, if there's any misconceptions on how to speak to the Hispanic audience now. Like, what are you hearing from your clients and how are you guiding them?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think is really important in a moment like this is to also not expect perfection. I think the reality is there are a lot of contradictions, as Mike said, between potentially some of the things that the board or CEOs of companies feel like they have to do for shareholder value, which is ultimately how they're being held to account, right? As, their jobs ultimately, right? If they don't create that shareholder value, they lose their job and they lose the ability to do anything. And what that marketing position might be. So what I tend to talk about with my clients and colleagues in this space is, let's not focus on perfection. Let's focus on moving things forward in the best way that we can, and really highlighting true values where we can. So what I mean by that is, most companies, and some are, better at figuring out what that is and how to interpret it into marketing terms, but all companies have a set of values that they believe in outside of making money, right? I mean, making money is obviously really important if you run a company and that it's not a nonprofit. But at the end of the day, there's other things that go with that. So what I always try to talk about with clients and, advise is remember who you are. Don't even figure it out. Hopefully remember who you are and try to make decisions in alignment with that where you can. Now, if there are some contradictions because of things that are happening, then maybe you pause and you don't focus on that area and you focus on a different area where you can make an impact, right? I think the biggest issue I see sometimes is that fear and that just like frozen mode, right? Like, oh, well, I'm not sure, it's too complicated, so let me not do anything. That I tend to think is not the right move, because at the end of the day, time passes faster than you'd like. And when you're not out there communicating with your consumers and not building that brand love, you're falling behind your competitors and you're falling behind that loyalty wave, right? So again, if we think about the young consumers today, the Gen Zs and you know, even the younger millennials that are still figuring out their lives, they're building those brand connections right now. So if you're completely silent with them because you don't know what to say, you're missing out on that opportunity. So even if it's small, even if it's not exactly what you'd like it to be in an ideal world, start somewhere. Have the really honest conversations internally and figure out what you can do to move the brand forward with the consumers that you know you need and want for your brands, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, and like the misconception of like, we don't have to talk to multicultural consumers right now because it's too complicated and we don't want to mess it up. That's dangerous, right? You know, you got to figure that stuff out right now. There's lots of partners that can help you do that if you're not sure how to do it yourself. And so I would say, like, over the course of my career, even if I take a step back from this moment, the biggest thing I've seen over the years is this kind of, you know, I don't know, I don't understand it, right? Like, well, I don't speak Spanish, or I don't understand, like, I don't live in those communities, so I don't understand it. So I'm just going to turn away and hope that it, you know, doesn't impact me. You can't really afford to do that. So that's the biggest thing that I try to work on is, let's not go for perfection. Let's go what's true to you as a brand, and how do you make, you know, those small changes or those small movements towards where you want to be with your consumer set.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just hearing so many parallels with, you know, what you guys were saying earlier. Just during the pandemic, we saw this too. The brands that kind of shut off messaging or shut off like brand presence, you know, and just focused on the transactional, you know, programmatic presence, maybe, you know, kind of leaned on just reach and scale to keep the lights on. We're seeing that a little bit now, the fallout. Those brands didn't really speak to the consumers, you know, and I think, you know, this reminds me of the conversation that I had with Bowden a couple of months ago when we were discussing their Microsoft campaign geared towards Latina moms in the US. Is brands have to remember multicultural marketing is not illegal. And I think a lot of brands are forgetting that. They think that because there's like a Hispanic ad or a Spanish language ad or even featuring talent that they might get in trouble or they might be seen. Multicultural marketing is not illegal. And I think that's what brands need to remember as well.
100%.
And I'd love to, usually I end this on a little bit of a brighter note, but I do think that this is an important part of this conversation to address before we wrap is being a Hispanic leader in the industry right now. Obviously we saw this with the Black community a couple of years ago during Black Lives Matter, and what's going on with ICE now isn't just, catered towards the Hispanic community. It's the immigrants in general in the US, but it's hard right now. I think, as a child of an immigrant, it's having a role as a journalist, trying to stay neutral, but you're getting caught up in the social feeds. I know personally it's been difficult. What is it? I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience and how you're kind of staying grounded. And if you have any advice to share for other leaders in the space who are being affected by what's on the news right now. Mike, let's start with you.
My kids are keeping me grounded. I now have a high schooler who travels to Manhattan every day on his own on the train. It really brings them just home a lot of like, okay, what's reality right now? What does he need to actually be cautious of and be careful with and be out there? So, as much as I see it in the feeds, it's something that's like, it's real to me. And sort of getting that. I'm also the board chair at an international school. And so we've had, those sort of talks with our community in regards to that. And so again, it's sort of like keeping it sort of, yes, there's what we see in the feeds and there's the extremes that we see, but, seeing it for real, seeing it actually amongst people and people you love, it really makes it much more tangible. Okay, I can do this. Right, this is something I can work toward. This is something that I can help them with. This is something I can teach my son. And so it does allow me to have that, like that level of it. And I think all of us, particularly those those of us within cultural marketing, those of us within Hispanic backgrounds, oftentimes whether we're working in a cultural marketing agency or in a general market agency, things are unfolding around us, and we're so having those conversations with folks. We want to make sure that we're there for each other from that perspective. I know that sometimes, you have these decisions to make that are going on a day by day basis, but it is also, it is important just to remember that these situations are, these are real people, right? We have family members. Many Hispanics live in mixed status households, right? One U.S. citizen, one not, a combination, that's a very common thing. And so we need to make sure that when we are putting out messaging that we're aware, and many of us are, like those of us who come from the community are aware that the consumers are much more complicated than we really want them to, right? We don't want them to be so complicated. We want them to fit within our psychographics, right? But we want to make sure that we keep this in mind, that there are many different situations that are happening right now. There's so much nuance that is happening. And I think our messaging has to understand that. Coming from now working with the nonprofit sector, you're seeing a lot of that, where a lot of funding for the organizations that focused on DEI and diversity and cultural institutions are under attack. And so there's a lot of fear there. And so we're trying to make sure that, hey, how do we look past this? How do we look towards the future? And figure out like what is the messaging that we need to put out there to our constituents? What is it that we need to put out to our supporters? And how is it that we keep it grounded within actual people? Because that's who we can affect, right? The person in front of us. That's who we can do. So if we are looking beyond that, we're looking at our consumer, how can we make their lives better, right? How can we provide that impact that really sort of works with them? And so I think really sort of focusing on the people of the matter and what we can affect, I think will help us move through this moment. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to be an easy one. Whether you're on the nonprofit or for-profit side, there's a lot going on. And I think that in terms of the amount of just the people are just so unsure about the future, that I think is really what's really going to affect what happens the next few months and the next year, next 3 years. But really sort of, I think as brands, we have a chance. As marketers, we have a chance to really communicate to them, tell them that we understand that they're not sure, that they're insecure, and that things around them are just kind of going crazy, but that we can, that we understand them. And I think that is what people want more than anything, is to be understood.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Mike. So what I'm hearing is, to kind of get through this time, remembering family, purpose, and that we play a role in shaping media representation and acceptance and just the power of brands. Marina, you have a tough job, and you have to keep the business going, but you also, you were telling us about your roots earlier, your Argentina, Mexican roots. How are you staying grounded during this time, with this volatile news cycle?
Well, definitely similar to Mike. My son definitely keeps me grounded as well. I want to make sure that if he looks back at this time, that he feels like that, his mom was trying to do something to help the situation. and not turning the other way. I think that's really important to me. So I have a difficult job in that I have to stay neutral as it relates to our brands, because I think it's important that every brand and every company has to make their own decision. And I'm not here to sway them on, how they run their companies. I'm here to help them understand consumers and how to communicate to those consumers in the best possible way, given their brand realities, right? So that's my professional life. On the other hand, I'm an immigrant. I came here, when I was 10. And I am surrounded in my family, friends, and colleagues with, as Mike said, mixed status homes, or just people who are scared because they never thought about having to walk out the door with their passport in their hand because, someone might racially profile them. So that really impacts me in a personal way. So where I've really tried to focus my attention outside of work was what I was mentioning earlier with the community projects group. And it's just like a group of people that have come together to say, how can we positively impact the situation? The study was one of those things. And the thing I'm working on right now is actually a fundraiser to support, immigrant families and anyone that's been either unfairly detained or that has had fallout from situations here in Southern California. The fundraiser is actually happening on the 20th of February here locally, but we're also doing a big push digitally so that people can donate if they want. And to me, that's just a way that I think as humans, we can come together and say, kind of again, hearkening back to the only thing that Trump's hate is love, right? Is compassion, is empathy, is trying to do what you can to help the situation. And it's not about politics. It's really about understanding that people are suffering, people are, in pain, and they need help. And if we have it in our hands to do a little bit to help them, then let's mobilize together and let's do that. As Hispanic leaders in this industry, we've all made a career and a business as agencies and as brands, with these consumers, right? They have bought the products and services that we've marketed to them. And I think it's, part of our role to ensure that they're being properly represented and that they're being supported in times of need. So I do that. Again, on the side, I tell everyone who gets involved or helps, like, you don't have to get your company involved, right? You don't have to say, hey, I'm representing XYZ company in order to do something. You're allowed to have a life outside of your work, and you're allowed to do with that life what you think is the right thing for you personally, right? So that's what I'm really focused on, and that's keeping me grounded, because otherwise I just will spiral, right? Just the feeling of frustration. I have to take social media breaks because I will go down that rabbit hole, and it's not super productive for me. So what I do is I take breaks, and then I focus the attention on, all right, what can I do? This fundraiser or other activities I can support friends with, and just use my skills to help in other ways. So that's really the thing that's keeping me grounded. And I will say it's helped me a lot in that I see the impact it has on my teams. The fact that they know that there's someone in a leadership position that is willing to do something, and speak up and vouch for them. Like, I think it means something to them. And I've had lots of people reach out to me on that front of like, hey, we're not seeing a lot of leadership really being vocal about what's happening to us. And, even if it's from just my little corner of the world, if I can make one person feel heard and seen and know that there's a way forward where they can, do something to support the community, then it feels like a good day, or good enough.
Good enough. Yeah. So family, community, driving change, our impact on marketing and the industry. These are all great tips. I'm going to take it to heart because this newsfeed is killing me lately. And I just want to thank you both so much. I don't think we have all the answers. I don't think all the answers were coming out of today, but I think you both provided such a great perspective on the different nuances and the complexities and why this is we're going towards a big moment that's happening on Sunday. So I thank you both for your time, your honesty, your transparency, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for
Thanks
having
for
us.
having me.
Yeah.